2,530. That's the number of homeless students in North Dakota. On July 22, 1987, President Ronald Reagan signed the McKinney-Vento Act into law.
The McKinney-Vento law is the federal law that makes and helps me do my job. So it protects these kids that are in transition. So they get extra rights.
Under the McKinney-Vento Act, state educational agencies are required to ensure that every homeless child has an equal access to the same free public education resources. This is Cherise Rones. She's the Student in Transition Coordinator. Her job is to ensure that North Dakota public schools are following the McKinney-Vento Act.
We have kids who are considered homeless, and it's not the stereotypical, how society thinks of somebody under a newspaper, under a bridge kind of a thing. With our youth, it looks a little bit different, especially in the Midwest, where we have harsh winters. So we have a lot of kids who we call them the hidden homeless. So they're not necessarily laying out in the streets, but they definitely are in housing that is temporary and they can be uprooted from it for no reason. And their parents have no lease or anything in their name. Obviously, if you're in a shelter, that's considered to be temporary, any kind of a shelter. And then sometimes we have kids who are in hotels, and these aren't the hotels that, big pools and, those kinds of things. I mean, they're very basic. Some of them I don't even feel like should have children around in that environment. But so they'll live week by week or sometimes month by month there. So those kids qualify. We have families who are doubled up with another family. So due to economic hardship, we have kiddos who, mom and dad are either incarcerated or not around. They can't take care of themselves, let alone kids. And so they're living with somebody other than their biological parent. And that doesn't have to be family. It can be a friend. It can be family, but they're considered unaccompanied youth in that environment. We do have kids that stay in cars. We have kids that stay in storage units. We have kids that stay, like if you have a garage and it's got like an above area, they call it a living quarter, but there's no running water. There's not the basic necessities. That's considered obviously unsheltered. I do rely a lot on referrals from the community members, so other agencies that work with these families. The biggest way that we get a hold of these families is when they register their kids. We have our online registration. There's like 3 or 4 questions that they ask on there relating to homelessness. And if they answer yes to any one of them, it gets triggered to me, and so then I get a red flag. So then I go and look in that application. I contact that family. Sometimes they'll get an address change, and for us, you have to provide 2 proof of residency where you're living. And if they can't provide that, saying like they have a bill in their name or they have a mortgage or a lease in their name, if they can't, that also triggers her to contact me and say, hey, this family's not able to provide that. You might want to check it out. And so that's the initial piece. But then kids who are already in our school system, I rely massively on the social workers, counselors, the people that have that day-to-day contact with them. If they see something, the kid's coming in late every day and maybe the hygiene's bad, or random people are dropping them off, or maybe somebody's under the influence when they drop them off, those kinds of things obviously trigger somebody else to get involved. And so if we think it's something to do with their residency and not having something permanent, then we also kind of reach out to those families. We used to be where we'd have gaps in a couple months where the numbers coming in were like a little bit lower, but the last couple years it's been pretty consistent across the board where we've got big numbers coming in all throughout the school year. Last year we had 415 kids in the program. The year before that, we had 524. That was the highest since 2006 when this program started, and we've been on the uptick. So they would get the free breakfast and lunch, and then we talk about anything school related I can financially help with. So if you have a junior who's in basketball, there's an athletic fee. So I ask for that to be waived. If they need shoes for that, if they need equipment for anything that, any sport that they're in. If they're in a club, an art club, and they need like the art supplies, we pay for that. So anything revolving around school and them being able to participate, this program would help cover any financial means for that. The biggest thing that we offer that people use in the program is the transportation. So we might have a kiddo who starts down on the south side of town in a school, and they're temporarily there, maybe living with somebody else. Mm-hmm. Now they get permanent housing, which is great, but it's on the north side of town, right? And they don't have a car. And BPS does not provide transportation across boundaries. So we don't provide transport busing from that to that. But we don't want them to move schools, because what happens if they become homeless again? Then we're just constantly moving these kids around, right? So we want that stability. So what we provide is transportation if they qualify. Basically, they can't have their own car, those kinds of things. We help transport them. And so we have for at least the remaining of that school year, so they can remain in that, and the connections and we want to keep them, like I said, stable. So we'll provide that transportation. This is the third year that we had created a van program. So before we would just use taxis, and taxis would go and pick up them, mm-hmm. take them to school, pick them up after school, take them home, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so that gets a little tricky. I was averaging anywhere from like 50 to 60 kids a day on taxi. And that can be bombarding for taxi when they don't have the proper resources. So right now we have 3 vans that run, and they're just like minivans. So you can fit 6 kids and a driver. And we schedule it to where if they qualify for that it's like a route. The van goes and picks up the kids in the morning, takes them to school, goes back after school, takes them home. And so we've been doing that now. This will be the 3rd year that we do it. And there's been huge, within the first 3 months of us doing it 3 years ago, we had a child that, because it's the same driver, they start to trust that driver. So that's more stability that we're trying to help with. Some kids have a lot of anxiety going to school. And so knowing that they're going to get in that van this morning, it's the same driver, he greets them, how you doing? Just kind of pumping them up to have a good day. And that child ended up confiding in a driver about some abuse that was going on at home. And so I really honestly believe in my heart that never would happen if it would have been a taxi driver. So just having those things happen within the van program, to me, is well worth it. We do get, like this last year, I had a waiting list because we were just so full. We are actually federally mandated to provide that transportation that I talked about. We can't just say to them, oh, sorry, now you're up in north, figure it out, kind of thing. We have to provide, and it doesn't have to be a van, and it doesn't have to be a bus, just some sort of transportation. So even if that's a CAT bus pass that they use, if we provide it, we're doing what we're supposed to do. Once they get in the program, so let's say in November they were in a shelter, and December they find permanent housing. Okay, they have a lease and everything. The services that we provide last all year long. It doesn't, just because you got permanent housing doesn't mean now we stop, right? Because we know you're still probably, struggling a little bit. And so we want to help you kind of boost you out of there. So we're going to help out with the kiddos in school, any financial, and then as far as like community stuff, if they're needing help with housing, if they need help with funding for something, utilities, those kinds of things, then I do the resource out. So then I set them up with a contact in the community, whatever programming they need. Maybe they need addiction, maybe they need, those kinds of things. And so then I have my contacts in the community that I refer and get them hooked up with. And that works well, especially for families who are new to the area and have no idea what the resources are in the community. My obligation as a homeless liaison is to make sure that the students have their best educational experience that they can. So my focus is on the students. So even if mom and dad aren't doing exactly what I need them to be doing, or they're not cooperating, I still need to work with and make sure that that kid's experiencing that education, and not hindering it because of what's going on in their home life, or what is or what's not going on in their home life. So normally if a kiddo doesn't provide immunization records within 30 days of enrolling, they have to sit out of school until they get those vaccinations. Okay, we can't do that with a student in transition. So they might not have their documentation right away or their shots right away. We work with them to get that taken care of, but we cannot they cannot miss any school based upon that. For us, we have to have that documentation when they register. You have to have your birth certificate, this, and this. They don't have to provide any documentation. We have to enroll them. Under the McKinney-Vento law, we have to enroll them immediately, even if they just come in with no paperwork. Now, obviously, that's kind of a red flag. We want to make sure that they're supposed to be with this person that they're with, and that those kinds of things. So we do a little investigation, but we can't say, well, we can't do that until you get your birth certificate. We can't put you in school. We can't do that. So I write this federal grant, and it's federal dollars that go through DPI, and then DPI disperses it amongst the districts. And so it's been very minimal, that we apply for. And so then we use that money. And honestly, most of that money is used just for transportation, to pay for the drivers and those kinds of things. And then we have district funds. The district puts aside so much money for us to use for the program. And then we do fundraising. So we do big fundraisers throughout. We have one big fundraiser. It's a calendar raffle that we've done now for 2 years. Before that, we would do concerts and things like that. But we do one big fundraiser every year for that. And then we get a lot of monetary donations from businesses in town, organizations. We even have the Simley Middle School student council does a hot chocolate and something kind of thing one day, and then they donate that money to the program. So between donation, fundraising, that federal grant, and then the district dollars, it's kind of all put together. Since this job, I have become a huge advocate because I don't feel like not just our community, but our public officials, whether it's local or statewide or even the national, are aware that this happens in North Dakota. Everybody wants to think this is stuff that happens in Chicago and those kinds of things. So I've been in I'm in monthly meetings with city commissioners that are in there. I have went up to the legislature and testified before. I have went to Washington, D.C. and met with our senators and their staff, which was a huge eye-opening experience for them, I think, because they were going off of national numbers. The HUD, which is the Housing Development, the federal program, their definition of homelessness is different than what the education system uses, what we use on a national level. So somebody who is doubled up or somebody who is in a shelter or those kinds of things, they don't qualify. That's not a HUD homeless person, but that is over here. So when they see the national numbers over here that they're presented, they are very skewed. I went to the conference was in Washington, D.C., and then we were able to go up on the Hill and talk with our senators. But there was a vendor that had these posters, and it had national statistics. How many homeless youth are in every state, right? Mm-hmm. And we went up and we looked at ours. They had 12 listed in North Dakota. And I was so perplexed that I took the poster with me to my meeting with the senators and said, do you see this number? Okay, last year, and I don't remember what it was, but it was in the 400s. Last year I had 4 alone in the Bismarck School District. Mm-hmm. And then we figured out that they were using the HUD definition. So just they don't get all the right information. It would be perfect if we had somebody who did elementary and somebody who did secondary, a liaison for all the elementary. I think we would be able to be more intense, case management with these really deeper end families that are super crisis and need that extra support. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they come in the program and they don't need any services, but they're just identified, in the program. But there's a lot of harder cases that need that more intense case management that we're just not able to do right now because there is just one of me. And I don't think it's necessarily state, but it's agency-wise too. We really need more transitional housing for families. We have a huge gap we have emergency shelter here, like the United Way, domestic violence, those kinds of things, right? So we have that covered. But it's either you have to be in an emergency or you have to have permanent housing. There's no in between. We need that gap filled, big time, where families can stay, be safe, and have those resources, that daycare, being able to have a job and and pay minimal. The people who work in this line of work know that. But I don't think the community members, the politicians, the city officials, I don't think they understand the real need for that. That transition piece is huge, because I really feel it helped with the stability of the family. If they were able to do that for that 6 to 9 month period, now they're going from the emergency shelter, they're grinding their work in for 30 days or however long they can stay there, and then they maybe get just enough to put down a down payment and security deposit on an apartment for 1 month. So they'll go there so they can get out of the shelter, but then now they're having to pay that rent, and now they're, you know what I mean? So now what? Now they get evicted in 2 months because they can't afford it. This way they're saving that money in that period of time, so they at least have all of that money plus some to be able to be stable in their permanent housing.